Get your hands off me. I paid for this seat. The words cut through the cabin like a blade. A cell phone camera clicks. A woman screams. The metallic rip of a zip tie cuff being pulled tight echoes through first class, and suddenly everyone is watching. This isn't a criminal. This is Isaiah Brooks' passenger in seat 2A. He's wearing a $40 hoodie, but his ticket cost $12,500. And in 60 seconds, he will be dragged down the aisle of Transglobal Flight 447, his face scraping the carpet, all because a flight attendant decided he didn't belong. But she didn't know who she was touching. She didn't know about the $48 billion contract in his briefcase. And she didn't know that by tomorrow morning her single act of prejudice wouldn't just cost her a job. It would cost Transglobal Airlines everything. The air pressure changes as the aircraft door seals shut. The hum of auxiliary power fills the silence. And somewhere between Gate 23 and this moment, everything went catastrophically wrong. Isaiah's hands are zip-tied behind his back now. His expensive noise-canceling headphones have fallen to the floor, crushed under a security officer's boot. His briefcase lies open in the aisle, papers scattered like evidence at a crime scene. Among them, clearly visible to everyone watching, is a document with a header in bold letters. Classified. Department of Defense. Project Sentinel Implementation Schedule. Diane Fletcher, the senior purser with 26 years of experience and a rigid helmet of blonde hair, stands near the galley with her arms crossed. She watches the scene unfold with something that looks like grim satisfaction. She was certain she was right. Certain he didn't belong. Certain that maintaining standards meant making hard decisions. She was catastrophically wrong on all 3 counts. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Rewind 3 hours. To understand how a $100 billion airline was brought to its knees not by a market crash or competitor, but by a single act of prejudice, we need to go back. Back to a flagship lounge at JFK Terminal 5, where a man sat in a leather chair, exhausted and unaware that his entire life was about to become a global news story. Back to the moment when Isaiah Brooks, one of the most powerful men in America, made the mistake of flying while black. JFK Terminal 5, Transglobal Flagship Lounge, 4:15 p.m. The Transglobal Flagship Lounge at JFK's Terminal 5 was a carefully curated symphony of privilege. Crystal champagne flutes clinked softly against marble countertops. Laptop keyboards clicked with the hushed urgency of people who believed their emails could change the world. The air carried the scent of expensive perfume, slightly too strong, mingling with the aroma of complimentary aged scotch and artisan cheese plates. It was an environment meticulously designed to insulate its occupants from the mundane chaos of travel. A velvet rope sanctuary for the global 1%. And in this sanctuary, looking thoroughly out of place, sat Isaiah Brooks. He wasn't wearing a custom-tailored suit. He wasn't barking orders into a rose-gold iPhone. He was slouched in a plush leather armchair near the window, wearing faded, dark-wash jeans, a simple black hoodie with the hood down, and a pair of well-worn Adidas sneakers that had seen better days. His only concession to luxury was the Bose noise-canceling headphones over his ears, from which the faint, complex rhythms of a neo-jazz quartet could be heard if you listened closely enough. Isaiah was 39 years old with a face that was more thoughtful than classically handsome. High cheekbones, intelligent eyes, a jaw that suggested both strength and restraint. He had the kind of stillness that people often mistook for weakness. They were mistaking it now. The couple in the adjacent seats, a man in a shiny suit with too much cologne, and a woman whose face had been pulled tight by one too many cosmetic procedures, kept glancing at him. Their disapproval was a tangible thing transmitted through raised eyebrows and whispered comments just loud enough to be heard. "How did he get in here?" the woman muttered, not bothering to lower her voice much. Her husband shrugged. "Probably an employee pass. You know how they let the staff family members use these lounges now? Standards aren't what they used to be." Isaiah felt the stares but didn't acknowledge them. He'd learned long ago that responding to every microaggression was a waste of energy. Instead, he kept his eyes on his tablet, scrolling through encrypted documents that would make most people's heads spin. He was exhausted. Not just red-eye flight tired, but soul-deep tired. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones after 96 consecutive hours in a classified data center in Northern Virginia, surviving on coffee and 4-hour sleep intervals, finalizing the launch sequence for something that would change the course of modern warfare. Isaiah Brooks wasn't just a tech CEO. He was the founder, lead architect, and majority shareholder of Apex Quantum Systems, the most advanced artificial intelligence and quantum logistics company on Earth. And just 3 hours ago, in a secure conference room at the Pentagon that didn't officially exist, he had signed the single largest defense contract in modern history. $48 billion over 10 years. Project Sentinel, a quantum encrypted logistics network that would exclusively manage the entire global supply chain and cybersecurity framework for the United States Department of Defense. Every military operation, every supply shipment, every classified movement in 4 continents. All of it would run through systems Isaiah had built. The meeting in London tomorrow was pure formality. A handshake with NATO officials, a photo opportunity for the Joint Chiefs, a ceremonial signing of documents that had already been executed in triplicate. The real work was done. Now he just wanted to sleep for 8 uninterrupted hours in his $12,500 first-class pod on Flight 447 to Heathrow. Just sleep. That's all he wanted. He took a sip of water, plain room temperature, not the champagne everyone else seemed to be drinking, and checked his watch. Boarding would start in 10 minutes. His phone buzzed. A text from his chief of staff, Honoraeus, safe travels. Don't forget the NATO reception is black tie. Please don't show up in a hoodie. Isaiah smiled slightly and typed back, no promises. Anna had been with him since the beginning. Since Apex was just 3 people in a garage in Austin, since venture capitalists laughed them out of boardrooms since the day the Department of Defense took their first meeting and everything changed. She knew him well enough to know that his casual dress wasn't rebellion or ignorance. It was intentional. It was a test. If people couldn't see past his clothes to his credentials that told him everything he needed to know about them. A crisp, synthesized voice chimed through the lounge speakers. We are now pleased to announce the pre-boarding of Transglobal Flight 447 to London Heathrow, starting with our first-class passengers and Transglobal Elite members. Isaiah stood, stretched his shoulders, and grabbed his simple black backpack. No designer logo, no status signaling, just a functional bag that held everything he needed. Laptop chargers, a change of clothes. The classified briefcase that was currently handcuffed to his wrist. He shuffled into line with the other first-class passengers. A businessman in an expensive suit. A woman in designer athleisure that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. An elderly couple holding hands, their platinum status tags dangling from matching luggage. The gate agent, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, scanned his digital boarding pass without really looking at him. Beep. Green light. Clear. Isaiah stepped onto the jet bridge, the accordion tunnel that connected the terminal to the aircraft. His footsteps echoed slightly against the ribbed walls. And then he was through the aircraft door, turning left into the exclusive front cabin, into the realm of lie-flat seats and hot towel service, and the illusion that flying at 35,000 feet could somehow be luxurious. He found his seat, 2A, a spacious pod with its own door, a minibar, and a screen the size of a small television. He tossed his backpack under the ottoman, unlocked the briefcase from his wrist, and set it carefully in the storage compartment and sat down with a long exhale. That's when he first saw her. Her name was Diane Fletcher. She was 52 years old with a rigid helmet of blonde hair that hadn't moved in any wind since 1998, and a smile that was all teeth and absolutely no warmth. She was the senior purser on Flight 447, a 26-year veteran of Transglobal Airways, and she believed deeply fundamentally that first class was a privilege to be earned, not just bought. Diane was from an older school of aviation. She had started her career when flight attendants were still called stewardesses when they wore little pillbox hats and white gloves, when they served 7-course meals in coach and passengers dressed up to fly. When, in her carefully curated memory, flying meant something. She had worked what she thought of as the golden age of aviation, and she had watched with increasing bitterness as that golden age tarnished. As dress codes relaxed, as passengers started showing up in sweatpants and flip-flops, as the sanctity of first class was violated by people who, in Diane's expert opinion, didn't belong there. She'd fought against it, written memos to management about maintaining standards, complained about passengers who looked like they'd just rolled out of bed, been written up twice for what the HR department called discriminatory seating practices, though Diane would never use that phrase. She wasn't discriminating. She was maintaining standards. There was a difference. Both times she'd been sent to sensitivity training. Both times she'd sat through PowerPoint presentations delivered by earnest young women with clipboards who used phrases like unconscious bias and respectability politics. Both times she'd smiled, nodded past the required quiz, and gone right back to her old ways, because Diane Fletcher wasn't racist. She'd served black passengers before. Plenty of them. Professional athletes, entertainers, business executives in three-piece suits. She had no problem with them. They knew how to dress. They knew how to behave. They belonged. But this man settling into seat 2A, the one in the hoodie and jeans with the worn-out sneakers and the cheap backpack, he didn't belong. And Diane could tell in 3 seconds. Her eyes performed a rapid assessment. No visible jewelry, no expensive watch, no designer bag, clothes that looked like they came from a department store clearance rack. And that hoodie, that damn hoodie, the universal symbol of everything wrong with modern flying. He was probably a buddy pass traveler, she decided. An employee's relative flying for free on a standby ticket that had been upgraded by mistake. Or worse, someone who'd fraudulently acquired miles and was about to be caught. Either way, he was her problem to solve. Diane glided over to seat 2A, her smile fixed in place like a mask that had been superglued on. Her voice came out in that sickly sweet melody that service workers use when they're about to deliver bad news. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I see your boarding pass one more time?" Isaiah, still half immersed in the music from his headphones, looked up with visible annoyance. He'd just sat down. He'd just gotten comfortable. And now this. He pulled one earbud out. "Sorry, your boarding pass, sir. I need to verify it." Diane's smile didn't waver, but her eyes were cold, assessing already convinced of the answer. Isaiah sighed, pulled up the digital pass on his phone and held it out for her to see. Diane stared at the screen, then at her own tablet, then back at the screen. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in a slight frown. It says Brooks. Isaiah Brooks. You're in 2A. That's right." Isaiah hoped this was the end of it. Hoped he could put his headphones back on, close his eyes, and forget about the world for the next 7 hours. Diane gave him one more appraising look, a head-to-toe scan that made her assessment clear. Then she deployed her customer service voice again. "It's just that we often have to reseat passengers. Technology isn't always reliable." Isaiah waited. "Let me get you a pre-departure beverage while I check on this." Diane already mentally prepared her next move. "Orange juice, champagne. Just water, please." "Thank you." As Diane walked away from seat 2A toward the galley, she passed the junior flight attendant, Sophia Ramos. Sophia was 24 years old on her first international rotation, and vibrating with a mixture of nervous energy and genuine excitement about working first class on a transatlantic flight. Diane leaned in close as she passed her voice just loud enough for Sophia to hear. "Keep an eye on 2A." Sophia glanced toward the front of the cabin, confused. Him. Why, Diane straightened a cocktail napkin that didn't need straightening. "I've been doing this for 26 years, sweetie. You get a feel for these things. He's not first class. He's a problem waiting to happen." Sophia looked back at Isaiah Brooks quietly reading something on his phone, his headphones back over his ears, bothering no one. To her, he just looked like a tired traveler. But Diane was the boss. Diane had been doing this longer than Sophia had been alive. Sophia's stomach twisted. She had a very bad feeling about this. The first-class cabin of Trans-Global Flight 447 was filling up with the kind of people who were used to being first. First in line, first to be served, first to complain when things weren't perfect. Directly in front of Isaiah in the coveted 1A position, with its extra legroom and its proximity to the exit door, sat Judith Brennan. She was 63 years old, with steel gray hair cut in a no-nonsense bob, reading glasses perched on her nose and a Kindle in her hands, displaying what looked like a dense legal text. Judith had been a federal judge for 32 years, serving on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals until her retirement 18 months ago. She'd presided over cases involving civil rights violations, employment discrimination, unlawful detention, and about 1,000 variations on the theme of powerful people abusing powerless people. She knew the sound of injustice. She'd heard it in courtrooms and depositions in the carefully parsed language of attorneys trying to justify the unjustifiable. And she was hearing it now in the barely audible conversation between the senior purser and the junior flight attendant. Judith didn't look up from her Kindle, but she was listening. Always listening. Old habits from 3 decades on the bench died hard. She opened the voice memo app on her iPhone, set the phone face down on her tray table, and let it record. Just in case. She'd learned long ago that the truth had a way of changing when people thought no one was watching. 2 rows back across the aisle sat Carlos Rivera. He was 46 years old, Colombian-American, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that had been custom-tailored in Bogota, and he was trying very hard to focus on his laptop. The screen showed a marketing presentation for the tech firm where he served as VP of Brand Strategy, but the words weren't registering. Because Carlos had seen this before. 22 years ago, he'd been the man in the seat. Different airline, different city, same situation. He'd been flying back to Bogota for his mother's birthday, dressed casually, because it was supposed to be a quick trip, and he'd been pulled off a flight by airline staff who were convinced his frequent flyer status was fraudulent. No reason. No explanation. Just a certainty that someone who looked like him couldn't possibly belong in business class. They'd interrogated him for 45 minutes in a back office, made him prove his identity 3 times, made him show credit cards, employment verification, even a photo of himself with his mother. And when they finally grudgingly admitted their mistake, there was no apology, just a shrug and a new ticket for a flight 6 hours later. He'd been humiliated in front of 200 passengers, and not one person had spoken up. Carlos had sworn to himself that day if he ever saw it happen to someone else, he would speak up. He wouldn't be silent. He wouldn't be complicit. But now, sitting here in his expensive suit with his platinum elite status and his 6-figure salary, Carlos felt his throat tighten. Because speaking up meant making a scene. It meant being that Latino guy causing problems. It meant potentially being blacklisted, being labeled difficult, being remembered for the wrong reasons. His phone buzzed on the armrest. A text from his daughter Elena, who was 17 and fierce and uncompromising in the way only teenagers can be. Dad, remember, you told me to always stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Love you. Safe flight. Carlos stared at the message for a long moment. Elena was right. He had told her that, many times. And if he stayed silent now, what did that teach her? That principles only mattered when they were convenient. He kept his phone out, camera app ready, and watched. 3 rows behind Isaiah. The problem began. Richard Pemberton was 48 years old, a self-described road warrior who flew this route twice a month and believed this made him airline royalty. He was the VP of regional sales for a mid-level pharmaceutical company, the kind of guy who name-dropped executives he'd met once at conferences and who made sure everyone knew about his platinum elite status and his million-miler credentials. Right now, Richard was having what he would later describe as a very bad evening. His seat 5B, a perfectly good first-class pod, had a flickering entertainment screen. The display would work for 30 seconds, then fritz out, then work again, then glitch. It was annoying. It was unacceptable. And Richard Pemberton did not tolerate unacceptable. This is unacceptable. His voice carried easily through the cabin. Several passengers looked up. The screen is flickering. How am I supposed to review my presentation? Do you know how much I pay this airline? Hundreds of thousands of dollars a year? Diane Fletcher materialized at his side almost instantly, her professional sympathy mask sliding smoothly into place. Mr. Pemberton, I am so sorry. Let me reset the system for you. You've already reset it twice. Richard's face was flushing red now, the color rising from his collar to his receding hairline. It's broken. This is substandard. I want a new seat. Sir, as you can see, the cabin is completely full tonight. Then make one. Richard crossed his arms, his body language radiating the entitlement of someone who'd spent decades being told yes. Or I'll be on the phone with your corporate VP of customer relations before we even push back from the gate. I have his personal number. Diane's mask of pleasantry tightened almost imperceptibly. She knew this threat. She understood it intimately. A complaint from a platinum elite million-miler like Richard Pemberton would mean hours of paperwork, a formal incident report, a mark on her otherwise spotless record, and possibly a letter of reprimand. This was a threat she took seriously. Her eyes scanned the cabin, moving quickly over the filled seats looking for a solution, looking for the path of least resistance, looking for someone who wouldn't have Richard Pemberton's connections, who wouldn't cause the same bureaucratic headache, who could be moved without consequence. Her gaze landed on seat 2A, on the man in the hoodie. The calculation was instant and instinctive. He didn't fit. He probably didn't have corporate connections. He probably wouldn't escalate. He was in Diane Fletcher's 26 years of experience, the perfect candidate for an involuntary seat change. Decision made. One row behind Richard Pemberton, apparently absorbed in a classified technical manual, sat Lieutenant Colonel James Bradford of the United States Air Force. He was 51 years old, with short-cropped gray hair and the ramrod posture of someone who'd spent 30 years in uniform. He was on his way to RAF Mildenhall for a classified briefing on joint NATO operations. The manual he was reading dealt with quantum encryption protocols for military supply chains. Dry stuff. Technical. The kind of reading that required focus, which is why he hadn't noticed the brewing conflict yet. But he would. Very soon. Diane Fletcher took a deep breath, straightened her uniform jacket, and marched purposefully toward the front of the cabin. Her heels clicked against the aircraft floor with the confidence of someone who'd made this walk thousands of times. Sophia Ramos, still standing near the galley, pretending to organize cocktail napkins, watched her go. Her heart was sinking. She knew what was coming. She'd seen that expression on Diane's face before during training. The look of someone who'd made a decision and wasn't going to be swayed. Diane stopped at seat 2A and tapped Isaiah's shoulder with two perfectly manicured fingers. Isaiah opened his eyes, visibly annoyed at being disturbed for the second time in 5 minutes. He removed his headphones with the slow, deliberate movement of someone exercising patience. "Yes, sir." Diane's voice was still sweet, still professional, but there was steel underneath now. "We have a small equipment issue with one of our seats. We're going to have to move you." Isaiah frowned. "Move me where we have a lovely seat for you in our Economy Plus cabin. It's a window seat, and I'll be happy to offer you complimentary cocktails throughout the flight and a $300 travel voucher for the inconvenience." Isaiah stared at her as if she'd just asked him to fly the plane himself. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or resignation. The look of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. "No." Diane's plastic smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. I beg your pardon?" "No, thank you. I'm not moving." Isaiah's voice was quiet but absolutely firm. "I'm fine right here." The smile crystallized into something brittle and dangerous. "Sir, I'm not asking. I'm telling you, and I'm telling you." Isaiah interrupted, his tone still measured but now carrying an edge like a blade wrapped in silk, "that I paid $12,500 for this specific seat. I have a confirmed reservation. I've committed no violation of any policy. And I'm not moving because another passenger is having a tantrum about his television screen." The question hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Diane's face flushed. That passenger is a Platinum Elite member, and I'm a paying customer who followed every rule. Isaiah held her gaze. Or do Elite members get to decide who belongs in first class based on what they're wearing? There was no good answer to that question. Diane knew it. Isaiah knew it. And several passengers who were now pretending not to listen but definitely listening knew it. From seat 1A, Judith Brennan lowered her reading glasses and looked up. Her voice cut through the tension with the precision of someone who'd spent 3 decades commanding courtrooms. Excuse me. Not loud, but authoritative. But I couldn't help overhearing. You're asking this gentleman to vacate his paid seat? Diane turned, her smile snapping back into place. Ma'am, this is a crew matter. I appreciate your concern, but... I appreciate, Judith interrupted smoothly, that you're about to make a very expensive mistake. I've seen enough unlawful ejections in my career to recognize the setup. This passenger has a valid boarding pass. He's been seated without incident. And now you want to move him to accommodate someone else's complaint about a mechanical issue. She reached into her bag, pulled out her iPhone, opened the voice memo app with deliberate slowness, and set the phone face up on her tray table. The red recording dot blinked steadily, unmistakably. I'm Judith Brennan, retired federal judge, 9th Circuit Court of Appeals. Please continue. I'm listening very carefully. Diane felt the first tremor of uncertainty. A recording. A federal judge. This was escalating in ways she hadn't anticipated, but she'd already committed. Backing down now would mean admitting she was wrong. Would mean losing face in front of the cabin. Would mean Richard Pemberton would still be complaining and she'd have accomplished nothing. So she doubled down. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but I have a responsibility to all our passengers, and sometimes that means making difficult decisions. This isn't difficult. Isaiah's voice was quiet but absolute. This is simple. I'm staying in my seat. End of discussion. Diane's jaw tightened. Let me be very clear, sir. If you refuse to comply with crew instructions, I will have no choice but to call security. Let me be very clear. Isaiah echoed her phrasing, his voice dropping to something even quieter, but infinitely more serious. If you want me out of this seat, you will have to physically remove me. And if you choose to do that, everything that happens next will be your decision, not mine. Do you understand? For a long moment, they stared at each other. Diane Fletcher, who believed she was maintaining standards. Isaiah Brooks, who knew he was defending his dignity. Sophia Ramos watched from the galley, her hands frozen on a coffee pot. Her internal voice was screaming that this was wrong, that this was spiraling out of control, that someone needed to stop this before it became irreversible. But she was 24 years old with $52,000 in student loan debt and rent due in 8 days. Her voice wouldn't come. The words stayed locked in her throat. So she stayed silent and would hate herself for it later. Diane made her decision. She turned on her heel, walked to the galley phone, picked up the receiver, and pressed 3 digits. This is Senior Purser Fletcher on Flight 447, Gate 23. I need Port Authority security to aircraft. We have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions. Immediate response requested. She hung up and turned back to face the cabin, her expression one of grim satisfaction. She had followed protocol. She had maintained order. She had done her job. Isaiah Brooks settled back in his seat, closed his eyes, and waited. He'd given them a chance to walk away. Multiple chances. They'd chosen this path. Whatever happened next was on them. The cabin had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone knows something bad is about to happen, but no one wants to be the first to acknowledge it. In seat 5B, Richard Pemberton watched the confrontation unfold with a mixture of vindication and discomfort. His flickering screen suddenly seemed less important. He turned to his wife, Lisa, who sat in 5C with her arms crossed and her face carefully neutral. He should just move. Richard kept his voice low, but not low enough. Is it really worth making a scene over a seat? Lisa Pemberton, who'd been married to Richard for 23 years, and had watched him make scenes over far less important things, kept her eyes forward. He paid for his seat, Richard. I know, but it's just a seat, and I'm having a real problem here with my screen. Wouldn't it be easier if he just... If what Lisa turned to look at her husband for the first time since the confrontation began. If the black guy just gave up his seat to make the white guy happy. Is that what you're saying? Richard's mouth opened, then closed. His face flushed. I didn't mean it like that. Yeah. Lisa turned back to face forward. You did. They didn't speak again. 2 rows ahead, Judith Brennan had heard every word. She made a mental note, added it to her growing list of witness testimonies. This wasn't just about Diane Fletcher and her prejudiced assumptions. This was about every passenger who thought the man in the hoodie should just comply, just give up, just make it easier for everyone else. The soft bigotry of low expectations. Judith had written dozens of judicial opinions about it. Now she was watching it play out in real time 35,000 feet before the plane had even left the ground. Across the aisle in seat 3C, Carlos Rivera felt his hands start to shake. His laptop screen had long since gone dark from inactivity. He couldn't focus on work. Couldn't focus on anything except the knot in his stomach and the memory of being in that man's position 2 decades ago. His phone screen still showed Elena's text, "Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Carlos glanced around the cabin. Other passengers were watching now, some with curiosity, some with discomfort, some with the carefully neutral expressions of people who'd perfected the art of not getting involved. He thought about his daughter, about the conversations they'd had about courage and principles, about the speech he'd given her when she'd witnessed bullying at school and wanted to know if she should report it. Always speak up, he'd told her. Silence is how injustice survives. Easy words when they cost nothing. Much harder now. Carlos made a decision. He opened his phone's camera app and positioned it carefully on his armrest, angled toward seat 2A. He wasn't recording yet. But he was ready. If this escalated, when this escalated, he would have evidence. In seat 6C, a white woman named Emma Hartford was already crying softly. She whispered to her husband, Michael, seated beside her in 6D. "This is wrong. Someone needs to say something." Michael squeezed her hand but offered nothing else. He was a middle manager for an insurance company, conflict-averse by nature and profession. The kind of person who'd built an entire career on not making waves. But Emma wouldn't let it go. "Michael, this is wrong." "I know." His whisper carried no conviction. "But what are we supposed to do?" It was a question without a good answer. 2 rows behind them, in seat 8B, a Hispanic woman named Rosa Delgado was already on her phone. She'd opened Twitter and was live tweeting the incident with the kind of furious energy that only comes from watching injustice in real time. Watching trans-global air flight attendant harass black passenger in first class for no reason. He has valid ticket. He's done nothing wrong. She's calling security. This is unreal. #transglobal shame. She hit tweet and watched it post. 4 people liked it immediately, then 7, then 15. The first spark of what would become an inferno. In seat 4B, Colonel James Bradford finally looked up from his classified manual. He'd been dimly aware of raised voices, but military technical specifications required focus, and he'd learned to tune out ambient noise. Now, though, the tension in the cabin was impossible to ignore. He closed his manual and looked toward the front of the aircraft. Saw a man in a hoodie sitting in 2A. Saw a flight attendant standing near the galley with her arms crossed. Saw other passengers watching with varying degrees of interest and concern. Bradford didn't know what had happened, but he'd been in enough tense situations to recognize the warning signs. This was going to escalate. And when security arrived, it was going to escalate quickly. He kept watching, waiting. Near the galley, Sofia Ramos was pretending to organize cocktail napkins for the 3rd time. Her hands were trembling. She could hear Diane talking to the other flight attendants, explaining the situation, justifying her decision. He refused crew instructions. Multiple times. I had no choice but to call security. This is protocol. This is what we're supposed to do. But Sophia had watched the whole thing. She'd seen how it started, seen the way Diane had looked at the passenger, seen the assumption that had preceded the action. Protocol. That's what Diane kept saying, as if following rules absolved you of responsibility for the outcome. Sophia thought about her own training, the videos they'd shown, the scenarios they'd practiced, the emphasis on de-escalation, on treating every passenger with respect, on recognizing bias. And she thought about how all that training had vanished the moment Diane decided someone didn't belong. The jet bridge door opened. Heavy footsteps echoed in the tunnel. Security was here. 2 Port Authority police officers stepped onto the aircraft, and the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. The first officer through the door was Derek Mason. He was 28 years old, white, with the kind of aggressive swagger that comes from 3 years of authority and not enough experience to temper it. His hand rested near his belt, near his radio, and his cuffs, and his eyes swept the cabin with the practiced assessment of someone looking for trouble. Behind him came his partner, Luis Garcia. Luis was 49, Hispanic, with 22 years of experience in Port Authority security, and the weary expression of someone who'd seen this exact situation go wrong too many times before. He'd tried to talk Derek out of responding so aggressively on the walk over. Derek hadn't listened. Derek never listened. Diane Fletcher moved to intercept them near the galley, her voice low and urgent. "Thank you for coming. The passenger in 2A has refused multiple requests to move to another seat. He's been combative and disrespectful. I need him removed from the aircraft." Derek nodded, already forming his narrative. Difficult passenger. Refusing crew instructions. Clear-cut case. Luis, standing slightly behind his partner, frowned. Something about this felt off. The passenger in question, he could see him now, sitting in 2A, didn't look combative. Didn't look aggressive. Just looked tired. But Derek was already moving forward, his boots heavy on the aircraft floor. "Sir?" Derek's voice was loud, authoritative, designed to command attention and compliance. "I need you to step out of the seat." Isaiah opened his eyes slowly. He'd heard them coming. Had known this moment was inevitable from the second Diane picked up that phone. He looked up at Derek Mason and saw exactly what he expected to see, a young officer with something to prove and a situation he'd already judged. Officer. Isaiah kept his hands visible on the armrests, his body language deliberately non-threatening. "I've done nothing wrong. I have a valid boarding pass. I'm seated in my assigned seat. I've committed no violation. Flight crew has asked you to move." Derek's jaw was tight. "That's a lawful order. Failure to comply is a federal offense. The flight crew asked me to voluntarily give up my paid seat." Isaiah's voice remained measured. "I declined. That's my right." Luis Garcia stepped forward, his hand touching his partner's elbow. "Hey, Derek, let's just call the gate supervisor. We can sort this out without—" Derek shrugged off the touch, annoyed. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Stand up. Now." From seat 1A, Judith Brennan's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. "Officers. I'm Judith Brennan, retired federal judge from the Ninth Circuit. I've been recording this entire interaction." She gestured to her phone, still face up on the tray table, the red dot still blinking. "This passenger has not threatened violence. He has not used profanity. He has not violated any regulation. What you're about to do is unlawful detention." Derek glanced at her, irritation flashing across his face. "Ma'am, please stay in your seat and let us do our job." "I am in my seat." Judith's tone remained even. "And I'm witnessing what's about to become an assault in progress. I'm documenting it for the inevitable lawsuit." Derek's face flushed red. He didn't like being challenged. Didn't like having his authority questioned by civilians who thought they knew better. He turned back to Isaiah, and his voice had an edge now. "Last chance. Stand up and come with us voluntarily, or I will remove you by force." Isaiah looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke, his words careful and deliberate. "Officer, I am not resisting. I am not being violent. I am simply refusing to give up my seat. Those are different things. If you choose to use force against me, that's your decision. But I want it clearly understood that I am not giving you cause. It was the wrong thing to say to the wrong officer at the wrong time. Derek's ego, already bruised by Judith's intervention, couldn't tolerate this quiet defiance. This measured refusal from a man in a hoodie who thought he could tell a police officer what was and wasn't lawful. In seat 3C, Carlos Rivera saw it coming, saw the shift in Derek's body language, saw the decision being made. His hands were shaking as he positioned his phone, but he hit the record button, started filming. And then Carlos did something he'd sworn he would do but had been terrified to actually follow through on. He stood up. Stop. His voice trembled but carried. You're making a mistake. Every head in the cabin turned. Derek spun around, his authority challenged now from multiple directions. Sir, sit down. This doesn't concern you. No. Carlos felt like he was jumping off a cliff. I've been sitting here for the past 20 minutes. I watched everything. This man did nothing wrong. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't raise his voice. He asked to see a supervisor. He has a valid boarding pass. And now you're about to put your hands on him. Carlos lifted his phone higher, making sure the camera was visible. I'm Carlos Rivera, seat 3C. It's 6:47 p.m. and I'm watching a passenger being removed for the crime of existing while black in first class. Other phones came out. Not all at once. Not in a coordinated wave, but one by one, like fireflies lighting up at dusk. Emma Hartford in 6C, her hands still shaking but her phone steady. Michael Chen in 6D finally finding his courage. Rosa Delgado in 8B already streaming live to Twitter. A businessman in 9A whose name no one would ever learn, but whose video would get 15 million views. At least 7 different cameras. 7 different angles, all recording, all time-stamped, all capturing this exact moment. Derek looked around the cabin and saw what his partner had been trying to warn him about. This wasn't a clean removal anymore. This was being documented from every angle. This was going to be scrutinized. This was going to be everywhere. For just a second, Luis saw uncertainty flicker across Derek's face. Saw his partner realize that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't worth it. But Derek's pride was stronger than his judgment. Everyone needs to put their phones away and sit down, or you'll be removed too. Derek's voice was rising. This is a security matter, and interfering with law enforcement is a federal offense. Then arrest me. Judith's voice came from 1A. I'm a retired federal judge documenting a civil rights violation. I dare you to arrest me. Derek's hand moved to his belt, to the handcuffs, to the zip ties he carried for situations exactly like this, or at least situations he thought were exactly like this. Luis tried one more time. Derek, man, please. Let's just step back and... He refused a lawful order. Derek's voice was tight. He's getting removed. End of discussion. In seat 4B, Lieutenant Colonel James Bradford set down his classified manual. Something about the passenger in 2A had been nagging at him since the officers arrived. Something familiar. He'd been half listening to the confrontation while trying to read, and now he gave the scene his full attention. The man in the hoodie, the measured demeanor, the careful responses, the way he held himself despite being outnumbered and threatened. Bradford looked closer. Really looked. Not at the clothes or the casual appearance, but at the face, at the features, at the intelligent eyes and the high cheekbones and the expression that suggested this wasn't his first time dealing with authority that didn't recognize him. And then it clicked. Bradford had seen that face before. Not in person, but in briefings, classified briefings, Pentagon briefings. Briefings where they discussed the single most important civilian contractor in the United States defense infrastructure. Oh no. Oh God, no. Bradford stood up so fast his technical manual fell to the floor with a thud. His voice, when it came out, had the unmistakable ring of military command, the kind of voice that makes people stop and pay attention. Wait. Not shouting, but projecting. Authoritative. Immediate. You need to stop right now. Derek turned annoyed at yet another civilian interfering. "Sir, this doesn't concern—" "That's Isaiah Brooks." Bradford's voice was quieter now, but somehow more intense. The kind of quiet that demands attention. The name hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Diane Fletcher blinked. Hugh Bradford's eyes stayed locked on Derek. Isaiah Brooks, founder and CEO of Apex Quantum Systems. Derek's hand, which had been reaching for Isaiah's arm, hesitated. "So, I don't care if he's a CEO. The company that runs Project Sentinel." Bradford's voice took on an edge like a blade being slowly unsheathed. "The man whose systems currently manage the logistics for every United States military operation in 3 continents. The single most important civilian defense contractor to the Department of Defense." The cabin went absolutely silent. Even the ambient aircraft noise seemed to fade. Derek's hand dropped to his side. Bradford took a step closer, his posture military straight, his eyes hard. "You're telling me you're about to zip tie and drag off the man who 72 hours ago signed a $48 billion contract with the Pentagon to run our entire military logistics network?" Diane's face had gone white. Actually white. The color draining from her cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. I didn't know. I didn't." "You didn't know." Bradford's voice was ice. "Or you didn't care. Because I'm trying to understand how your senior purser looks at a man with a valid boarding pass sitting quietly in his assigned seat and decides he doesn't belong based on his clothes." Judith Brennan, still recording from 1A, spoke quietly but clearly for the record. "I believe that's called assumption of criminality based on appearance, also known as racial profiling, which is, for the record, illegal." Richard Pemberton in 5B had shrunk so far back into his seat he was practically part of the upholstery. His flickering screen was completely forgotten now. His complaint had started this chain reaction, and he suddenly wanted to disappear. Luis Garcia let out a long breath. This was what he'd been afraid of. This was why he'd tried to get Derek to slow down. Because you never knew who you were dealing with. You never knew when a routine call would turn into a career-ending mistake. Derek's face had gone from red to pale. The authority in his voice evaporated. We were just responding to a call from the flight crew. They said he was refusing. He was refusing to give up his paid seat." Bradford's words were clipped. "That's not a crime. That's a right." From seat 2A, Isaiah Brooks finally spoke. His voice was quiet, measured, almost sad. He looked up at Colonel Bradford, who was still standing in the aisle. "Colonel." Isaiah's tone was respectful but firm. "I appreciate the intervention, but I don't need my title to deserve basic human dignity. No one does." The words landed like a physical blow. Several passengers visibly flinched. Isaiah continued, his eyes moving to Derek, to Diane, to the other passengers who were watching. "I shouldn't have to be the CEO of a defense contractor to be treated with respect. I shouldn't have to have a $48 billion contract for my boarding pass to be considered valid. And the fact that my job title is the only thing making you reconsider your actions tells me everything I need to know about what you really see when you look at me." The silence that followed was deafening. Bradford, to his credit, looked ashamed. "You're right." He sat back down. "You're absolutely right. But they need to know who they're about to destroy their entire company over." Diane Fletcher felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. 26 years of service, perfect record, commendations, promotions, all of it disintegrating in real time. Because she'd looked at a man in a hoodie and decided he didn't belong. She'd made a lot of decisions in her career, thousands of them. But this was the first one she knew with absolute certainty she could never take back. Sophia Ramos, watching from the galley, felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd known this was wrong from the start, had felt it in her gut. But she'd stayed silent because Diane was the senior purser, because she was new, because she was scared. And now it was too late to matter. Derek Mason, standing in the aisle with his hand still near his belt, felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd been a Port Authority officer for 3 years. He'd done this job 100 times. Removed difficult passengers, enforced crew instructions, done what he was told. But this was different. This felt different. The multiple cameras, the federal judge, the military officer. And now the revelation that the difficult passenger was someone the Pentagon considered indispensable. Luis Garcia put a hand on his partner's shoulder. "Derek, we need to call this in. We need to talk to our supervisor before this goes any further." Derek shrugged off the hand. His pride wounded his authority, challenged his ego, screaming at him not to back down. "No." The flight crew made a call. "We're responding to that call. It doesn't matter who he is or what he does. He refused crew instructions. That's a federal offense under 49 U.S.C. Section 46504. He was quoting regulations now, hiding behind procedure, the last refuge of someone who knew they were wrong but couldn't admit it. Isaiah looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Officer Mason." He'd caught the name from the uniform badge. "This is your last chance to walk away. I'm giving you an out. Take it." Derek's jaw clenched. Derek's jaw. "Yeah?" Or what Isaiah's response was. Quiet. Almost sad. "Or you'll spend the rest of your life wishing you had." For just a moment the cabin held its breath. A crossroads. A moment where everything could still change direction. Where common sense could still prevail. Where someone could admit they were wrong before the damage became permanent. But Officer Derek Mason was 28 years old with 3 years of authority and an ego that had been challenged in front of 50 witnesses. He'd already committed, already chosen his path, already decided that backing down would be weakness. His hand closed on Isaiah's shoulder, and 7 cameras captured the exact moment when everything went irreversibly, catastrophically wrong. The moment Derek Mason's hand clamped onto his shoulder, Isaiah Brooks felt something cold and familiar settle deep in his chest. Not fear, he'd been afraid before, and this wasn't that. Not even anger, though anger was there, simmering beneath the surface. This was resignation. Recognition. The weary acknowledgement of a pattern he'd seen too many times. He'd spent his entire adult life building systems to prevent exactly this kind of stupidity. Algorithms that could predict supply chain disruptions months in advance. Artificial intelligence that could flag security threats before they materialized. Logic structures so sophisticated they could coordinate military operations across continents without a single point of failure. But here in this pressurized tube that hadn't even left the ground, no amount of technological genius could save him from a man who'd looked at his hoodie and decided he was a threat. "Officer." Isaiah kept his voice level despite the pressure on his shoulder. "I'm asking you one last time. Please remove your hand." Derek's response was to tighten his grip. Isaiah had taken taekwondo lessons when he was 16, had earned his black belt by 17. His father had insisted on it. In this world, James Brooks had told his son, black men don't get the benefit of the doubt. You need to know how to defend yourself. Isaiah's muscle memory kicked in. Pressure points throws moves that could have Derek on the ground in 3 seconds, but defending himself would become the story. CEO assaults officer. So Isaiah made a different choice. A choice he'd learned not from martial arts, but from a civil disobedience workshop in college. A choice made by protesters and activists who'd understood that sometimes the most powerful resistance was no resistance at all. He went completely limp, let his body become dead weight, let gravity do its work, gave Derek Mason nothing to fight against, and therefore nothing to justify fighting. From the galley, Sophia could see everything. Could see Isaiah go limp as Derek grabbed him. Could see the momentary surprise on the officer's face when Isaiah refused to fight back. Could see Diane standing near the forward exit with her arms crossed, watching like this vindicated everything she'd decided. Sophia's hands were frozen on the coffee pot she'd been holding for several minutes now. Her knuckles were white. The pot was shaking. Her hand moved toward Diane's shoulder. Stopped. Started again. Stopped. Just say something. Tell them to stop. Tell them this is wrong. but her voice wouldn't come. The words stuck behind her teeth like broken glass. She'd practiced this in training, speaking up, reporting problems, being an advocate. But training didn't include the weight of Diane's stare, didn't include the fear of being blacklisted, didn't include $52,000 of debt and $800 left in her bank account. So her hand dropped, and she watched. Judith had seen a lot in 32 years on the federal bench. She'd seen police officers lie under oath. She'd seen prosecutors suppress exculpatory evidence. She'd seen defense attorneys sabotage their own clients out of laziness or incompetence or simply not caring. But watching this, watching a man be physically assaulted for the crime of existing while black in first class, Judith felt the old rage ignite in her chest. The same rage that had driven her through law school, through her clerkship, through decades of fighting for justice in a structure that often had no interest in it. She kept her phone steady, zoomed in, made sure every detail was captured. Derek's hand on Isaiah's shoulder, the zip ties dangling from his belt. Diane Fletcher standing in the background with that expression of grim satisfaction. "This is Judith Brennan, retired Ninth Circuit judge." Her voice was prosecutorial. "I am witnessing an assault in progress. The passenger has not threatened violence. He has not used profanity. He has not violated any regulation. He has simply refused to vacate his paid seat. What is happening right now is unlawful detention and assault. The time is 6:48 p.m. Location is Transglobal Flight 447, Gate 23, JFK Terminal 5. Carlos's hands were shaking so hard he could barely keep his phone steady. He'd promised himself he would speak up, had stood up, had started recording, had called out what was happening. But now, watching Derek's aggressive body language, watching the way the officer's hand moved from Isaiah's shoulder toward his belt, where the handcuffs and zip ties hung, Carlos felt something he hadn't felt in years. Genuine physical fear. This cop wasn't just removing a passenger. He was looking for a fight, looking for an excuse to escalate. And Carlos knew from experience, knew from statistics, knew from the cold reality of being a brown man in America, how this could end for him too if he interfered too much. His daughter's text was still on his screen. Stand up for what's right even when it's hard. He kept recording, kept his camera steady. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what he could do without risking everything. Derek's second hand came up, grabbing Isaiah's other shoulder, preparing to pull him from the seat. Isaiah forced his body to go slack, completely slack, dead weight. Derek, expecting resistance, stumbled slightly. And then, in a move that would be dissected in training videos for years to come, he shouted, "Stop resisting!" Even though Isaiah wasn't resisting at all. Even though multiple cameras clearly showed Isaiah's hands down his body limp, offering no physical resistance whatsoever. Luis Garcia stepped forward, his voice urgent. "Derek, wait!" But Derek was beyond listening, beyond reason. He'd been challenged, embarrassed, questioned by civilians and military officers and federal judges. His authority had been undermined. His ego was shredded. And now this man in a hoodie who thought he was too good to follow orders, was going to comply even if Derek had to drag him off this plane himself. The zip tie package ripped open with that distinctive plastic sound. "Rapey." Multiple passengers gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Emma Hartford started crying. Derek pulled, not gently, not carefully, with the kind of excessive force that spoke to rage rather than duty, to pride rather than procedure. Isaiah's body hit the first-class carpet with a dull thump that resonated through the cabin. His $40 hoodie, the same hoodie that had triggered this entire catastrophe, scraped against the rough airplane carpeting. The briefcase that had been in the storage compartment tumbled out, fell open, papers scattered across the aisle like evidence at a crime scene. And among those papers, clearly visible to everyone watching, to everyone filming, was a document with a header in bold letters, classified, Department of Defense, Project Sentinel Implementation Schedule. Judith's camera caught it. So did Carlos's. So did Emma's and Michael's and Rosa's and at least 4 others. The proof of who Isaiah Brooks was scattered on the floor, impossible to deny. In seat 5B, Richard Pemberton watched Isaiah's body hit the carpet. This was his fault. The thought arrived, unbidden, unwelcome. His complaint about the flickering screen, his demand for a better seat, his threat to call corporate. Lisa's hand found his wrist, squeezed hard, too hard. He glanced at her. She was staring straight ahead, tears running down her face, not bothering to wipe them away. She didn't need to say it. He could read it in her grip. "You did this." Richard looked back at Isaiah being dragged past him, wanted to say something, do something. But his throat had closed, his voice gone. He'd gotten what he wanted, a passenger removed, problem solved. He just hadn't realized the cost. Derek dragged Isaiah down the aisle. Not quickly, because 185 pounds of dead weight is hard to move. Not efficiently, because nothing about this was efficient. Just with grinding, humiliating determination. Isaiah kept his hands visible, kept his body limp, kept his eyes open and alert, memorizing every detail, every face, every moment. Not fighting, never fighting, because fighting would give them the excuse they were looking for. The carpet burned against his face. His shoulder hit an armrest. His hip caught the edge of a seat leg. Small injuries. Nothing serious. But each one documented by multiple cameras from multiple angles. In seat 6C, Emma Hartford was openly weeping now. Her husband Michael had his arm around her, but his own face was pale, shocked. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not on a commercial flight. Not in 2024. Not in America. In seat 8B, Rosa Delgado's fingers flew across her phone screen, live tweeting every second. They're dragging him. He's not fighting. He's completely limp. They're dragging him off the plane. This is unreal. Hashtag transglobal shame. Hashtag Isaiah Brooks. In seat 9A, a businessman whose name would never matter was filming vertical video for TikTok. His hands shaking, his voice shaking as he narrated. "Holy shit, they're actually doing it. They're dragging him off. He didn't do anything. He just wouldn't give up his seat." In seat 4A, another passenger muttered, "This is insane. This is actually insane." Captain Veronica Walsh heard the commotion through the flight deck door, heard the raised voices, the gasps, the distinctive sound of someone being dragged across carpet. She'd been a commercial pilot for 19 years. She knew what those sounds meant. She picked up the interphone and called ground control. "This is Captain Walsh, Flight 447. We have a situation in the cabin. I'm requesting security footage from aircraft internal cameras for the past 15 minutes. Official request for the record." The ground controller acknowledged. The cameras were already recording. The footage would be time-stamped, officially documented, undeniable. Captain Walsh made that call knowing it might save her career later. Made it because she'd learned long ago that when things went wrong, having an official record was the difference between being held accountable and being made a scapegoat. By the time Derek dragged Isaiah to the galley, the point of no return had been crossed. 11 separate cameras had recorded the incident from different angles. 11 separate videos, all time-stamped, all showing the same undeniable truth. A man being violently removed from his paid seat by a police officer who'd confused ego with authority. The age of accountability had arrived on Flight 447, and no one was ready for it. Diane Fletcher stood near the forward exit watching. The first cold tendrils of genuine fear were creeping into her chest now. This had escalated far beyond what she'd anticipated. She'd thought it would be simple, quiet. One passenger moved, problem solved. Richard Pemberton's satisfied day continues. 26 years, all of it crumbling around her. Derek zip-tied Isaiah's wrists behind his back. The plastic bit into skin. Tight. Too tight. Another violation that the cameras caught. "Let's go." Derek was breathing hard from the exertion, from the adrenaline, from the shame he wasn't quite ready to acknowledge yet. Isaiah stood when Derek pulled him up his wrists, bound, his dignity intact, his face carefully neutral. They walked him off the aircraft, down the jet bridge, away from the cameras. But the damage was done. The evidence was captured. The videos were time-stamped. The witnesses were ready. And in approximately 43 minutes, when Carlos Rivera posted his video to Twitter, the entire world would watch what had happened to Isaiah Brooks. Silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The cabin frozen 50 witnesses to what they'd just seen. Sofia Ramos finally set down her coffee pot with trembling hands. She'd been gripping it so hard her fingers had gone numb. Now, looking at the scattered papers still lying in the aisle where Isaiah's briefcase had fallen, she felt something inside her crack. Not break entirely, but fracture. A hairline split in whatever armor she'd built around her conscience. Diane Fletcher stood near the galley, her arms uncrossing slowly, her confident posture deflating like a balloon losing air. She was trying to process what had just happened, trying to reconcile her certainty with the growing realization that she might have miscalculated. Badly. "We need to clean this up." Her voice lacked its usual authority. She gestured vaguely at the scattered documents. "Get those papers collected and secured." Sophia moved forward, mechanically kneeling in the aisle to gather the papers. Her hands were still shaking. As she picked up each document classified headers, technical specifications, DOD seals, she felt her stomach turn. These weren't the papers of a buddy pass traveler. These were the papers of someone important, someone powerful, someone who should never have been treated the way they'd just witnessed. In seat 1A, Judith Brennan tapped her phone screen, ending the voice memo recording. 43 minutes of audio, every word documented. She immediately opened her email and began attaching the recording to messages addressed to the ACLU, 3 different news stations, the FAA Passenger Rights Division, and her former law clerk who now worked for the Department of Justice. Subject line: unlawful ejection and assault. Transglobal Flight 447. Urgent. She hit send on all 4 emails before Diane could even think about asking people to delete their recordings. Carlos Rivera, still standing in the aisle by seat 3C, looked down at his phone. The video was 47 minutes long. His hands had steadied now that the immediate confrontation was over, but his heart was still racing. He'd done it. He'd stood up. He'd recorded. He'd spoken out. But had it been enough? Would it matter? Or would this just become another video lost in the endless scroll of injustice that people watched, felt briefly outraged about, and then forgot? His finger hovered over the Twitter app. He'd recorded this for a reason. Evidence only mattered if people saw it. He opened Twitter, uploaded the video with shaking hands, and began typing. Just watched Isaiah Brooks, CEO of Apex Quantum Systems, dragged off Transglobal Air for refusing to give up his paid first-class seat to an entitled passenger. He was composed. He was respectful. They zip-tied him and dragged him down the aisle anyway. 11 of us recorded it. This is what racial profiling looks like. Hashtag transglobal shame. Hashtag Isaiah Brooks. His finger hovered over the tweet button. This would make him visible, make him a target, make him part of the story instead of just a witness. He thought about Elena, about the conversation they would have when he got home, about being able to look his daughter in the eye and tell her he'd done the right thing when it mattered. He pressed tweet. The video went live at 6:52 p.m. In seat 5B, Richard Pemberton finally looked away from his flickering screen. His wife, Lisa, was staring at him with an expression he'd never seen before. Not quite disgust, but close. Something harder and colder. "You started this." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your complaint, your demand for a better seat. That's what started this entire thing." "I didn't know," Richard started. "You didn't care," Lisa interrupted. "You wanted your seat, and you didn't care what happened to anyone else to get it. And now a man was dragged off this plane because you couldn't handle a flickering screen." Richard opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain that it wasn't like that he hadn't meant for any of this to happen. But the words died in his throat because Lisa was right. He had started this. His entitled tantrum had been the first domino. Several rows back, Emma and Michael Chen were having a similar conversation in whispered tones. "We should have said something earlier." Emma wiped her eyes. "Before it got to that point." "What could we have done?" Michael asked, but his voice carried no conviction. "Something. Anything." Emma looked around the cabin at the other passengers, most of whom were now on their phones typing or calling or texting. All these people recorded it. But how many of us spoke up before it turned violent? The answer they both knew was very few. Near the cockpit, Captain Walsh's voice came over the intercom. Professional, measured, carefully neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Walsh. Due to a security incident, we're going to have a brief delay while we sort things out. We appreciate your patience and apologize for the inconvenience. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for an extended ground delay." A brief delay. As if what they'd just witnessed could be summed up as an inconvenience. Several passengers stood up. A man in 7A walked to the front, speaking directly to Diane. "I want off this flight. I'm not flying an airline that treats passengers like criminals." A woman in business class called out, "I'm recording a formal complaint. That was assault. We all saw it. Another passenger I'm calling corporate. This is unacceptable." The cabin was buzzing now, the shocked silence breaking into a cacophony of anger and disbelief, and people pulling out phones to make calls, to tweet, to post on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. The story was escaping, spreading, multiplying, and there was nothing Diane or Captain Walsh or Trans Global Airlines could do to contain it. On the jet bridge, Isaiah stood with his wrists still zip-tied behind his back. Luis Garcia had finally cut them off, looking sick as he did so. "Man, I'm sorry." Luis's voice was quiet. "Derek shouldn't have." I tried to stop him. Isaiah looked at him, his expression unreadable. "Your partner just made the worst decision of his career, and you let him." Luis had no response. Because Isaiah was right. A Port Authority supervisor arrived looking harried and angry. "What happened here?" Derek started to explain, using the voice he'd been trained to use when writing incident reports. Clinical. Detached. Subject refused crew instructions to vacate seat. Subject became argumentative and confrontational. Subject failed to comply with lawful orders from Port Authority officers. Subject was removed using minimum necessary force. "There are 11 videos," Isaiah interrupted quietly. 11 different cameras, all showing that I never raised my voice, never threatened anyone, and never resisted. Your officer grabbed me, dragged me, and zip-tied me while I was completely cooperative. Minimum necessary force is an interesting phrase for assaulting someone who's sitting still. The supervisor's face went pale. Videos. 11 of them. Time-stamped. From multiple angles, including one from a retired federal judge who documented the entire incident and has already sent it to the Justice Department. Isaiah's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath now. "You should probably start calling your lawyers." Carlos Rivera's tweet posted at 6:52 p.m. Eastern Time. By 7 Aru p.m., 8,400 retweets. By 7:30 p.m., 127,000 retweets, trending nationally. By 8 Aru p.m., 380,000 retweets, #1 worldwide. The exponential curve had kicked in. The videos started appearing from multiple sources. Not just Carlos's carefully filmed recording, but shaky vertical video from TikTok, professional-looking footage from business travelers who knew how to use their phone cameras, even a few Instagram story compilations that cut together different angles. Rosa Delgado's live tweet thread went viral on its own, with each tweet showing higher engagement than the last. Her followers jumped from 800 to 75,000 in under 2 hours. News outlets started DMing her for interviews. Emma Hartford's Facebook post, "Just witnessed the most disturbing thing I've ever seen on an airplane," got shared 19,000 times, mostly by suburban mothers horrified by the footage. The businessman in 9A, whose name no one would learn, posted his TikTok video with the caption, POV, you witness a hate crime at 35,000 feet. We haven't even taken off yet. It got 2 million views in the first hour. But it was Judith Brennan's video, 43 minutes of audio recorded from Seat 1A, complete with her judicial credentials stated clearly at the beginning, that became the definitive account. She'd sent it to news outlets and they'd jumped on it immediately. By 7:30 p.m., every major outlet had picked it up. CNN Black Tech CEO dragged off flight. NBC defense contractor forcibly removed. Fox Pentagon reviewing contractor relationships. 3 networks. 3 angles. 1 undeniable truth captured in 11 videos. The Pentagon. That was the angle that made this more than just another viral video. This wasn't just about airlines and discrimination. This was about a man who managed supply chains for the United States military being treated like a criminal by the very infrastructure he helped protect. At 7:31 p.m., the Department of Defense issued a terse statement through their press office. We are aware of the incident involving Isaiah Brooks, CEO of Apex Quantum Systems. We take allegations of discrimination against our contractors extremely seriously. We are reviewing our transportation partnerships with Transglobal Airlines. That 17-word statement was a grenade. Reviewing our transportation partnerships was Pentagon speak for, you're in serious trouble. Transglobal Airlines' stock, which closed regular trading at $134 per share, began dropping in after-hours trading. 129, 123, 118. By 8 p.m. #Transglobal. Shame had 2.1 million tweets. #Isaiah Brooks had 890,000. #Boycott Transglobal was trending with corporate accounts announcing they were suspending their travel contracts. A major tech company tweeted, effective immediately, we're suspending our $4.2 million annual travel contract with Transglobal Air until a full investigation is completed and corrective action taken. A Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company followed. We do not partner with companies that discriminate. Our employees will fly with airlines that treat all passengers with dignity. More companies piled on. The corporate exodus was swift and merciless. Social media had become a reputation execution chamber, and Transglobal was strapped to the chair. Isaiah himself, finally released from Port Authority detention with no charges filed, sat in a private office at JFK and scrolled through his phone with an expression somewhere between exhaustion and dark amusement. 247 missed calls, 683 text messages. His email inbox had exploded past 2,000 unread. His chief of staff, Ana Reyes, had left 17 voicemails, each one progressively more panicked. The last one, Isaiah. Where are you? The internet is on fire. The Pentagon is calling. The board is calling. Everyone is calling. Please, call me back. He texted her. I'm fine, no charges. Call you in 10 minutes. Then he texted his father, who'd taught him to build things they couldn't ignore, Dad. Remember when you said I needed to be twice as good to get half as far? I think I might have overachieved. His father texted back immediately. Just saw the news. Are you hurt? Do you need anything? Just tired. But I'm okay. Good. Now go make them pay for it. Isaiah smiled slightly and set down his phone. He was tired. Bone tired. Soul tired. The kind of tired that comes from being treated like a criminal for the sin of existing while black. But he wasn't broken. And he wasn't done. He picked up his phone again and called his attorney. Michael. He spoke as soon as the lawyer answered on the first ring. We need to talk about filing suit against Transglobal, against the Port Authority, against everyone involved. Not for the money, for the principle, and for the precedent. Already drafting the complaint. His attorney's voice was sharp-focused. We'll have it filed by Monday morning. But Isaiah, you should know this is going to be everywhere. Every detail of your life is about to be scrutinized. Let them scrutinize. Isaiah's voice was firm. I've got nothing to hide. They're the ones who should be worried. He hung up and checked Twitter one more time. The number was still climbing. 3.4 million tweets with #TransGlobalShame. The video with the most views, Carlos Rivera's original recording, now had 18 million views and counting. 18 million people watching him get dragged down an airplane aisle. 18 million witnesses to discrimination in action. Isaiah had wanted to sleep, had wanted 8 quiet hours in a first-class pod. Instead, he'd become a symbol, a hashtag, a viral moment. But if he had to be a symbol, he'd make sure it meant something. He'd make sure the people who did this paid a price that would echo through the entire industry. He'd make sure no one else ever had to go through what he'd just experienced. Tomorrow, Transglobal Airlines would start losing billions. Today, they'd lost something more important, their reputation. And Isaiah Brooks was just getting started. Transglobal Airlines headquarters, Manhattan, 6:47 a.m. The emergency board meeting had been called for 7 a.m., but Ronald Patterson, CEO of Transglobal Airlines, had been in his office since 5. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, had spent the entire night watching his life's work disintegrate in real time on social media. Now he stood at his office window looking out at the Manhattan skyline as the sun rose over the East River and watched the opening bell approach with the dread of a condemned man watching the clock tick toward execution. The conference room was filling with board members, all of them looking exhausted, angry, and scared. The general counsel was already there, laptop open, surrounded by legal documents and printouts of social media posts. The chief financial officer kept checking his phone and wincing at whatever he was seeing. Patterson walked in at 6:58 a.m. No greeting, no pleasantries, just straight to business. "How bad is it?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The CFO pulled up the stock ticker on the main screen. Transglobal Airlines ticker symbol TGA had closed yesterday at $134 per share. After hours trading had dropped it to $118. They watched in real time as the opening bell rang at 9:30 a.m. $120, $105, $91, $78, $64. Free fall. Hemorrhaging value faster than anyone had seen outside of bankruptcy. Traders dumping. Institutional investors fleeing. Retail panic selling. By 10:00 a.m., $51 per share. $52 billion in market cap gone. "Tell me about the contract cancellations." Patterson's voice was hollow. The CFO flipped to another screen. The list was long and growing longer in real time as he watched. So far, we've lost 47 corporate travel contracts. The big ones: NetCorp, Medifarm International, Quantum Dynamics, Lexus Financial Group. Combined annual value of approximately $4.2 billion. Personnel. 3 pilots have requested immediate transfers to other airlines. 15 flight attendants have submitted resignations. Our pilot union is demanding a review of crew training procedures. Our flight attendant union is complicated. They're defending Diane Fletcher's right to due process while also condemning racial profiling in general. Patterson rubbed his eyes. "What about the military contracts?" The room went very quiet. The general counsel spoke up, her voice tight. The Department of Defense suspended all transglobal flights carrying classified personnel or materials as of 7 a.m. this morning. That's $3.2 billion annually. They've also suspended our approval to bid on future military transport contracts pending a comprehensive review of incident protocols and discrimination policies. Patterson felt something break inside his chest. The military contracts weren't just revenue. They were prestige. They were certification. They were the seal of approval that said Transglobal was trustworthy enough to handle the nation's most sensitive operations. And they were gone. "What does the DoD want?" Patterson asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Comprehensive change." The general counsel read from an email on her laptop. Quote, "The department requires assurance that civilian contractors can travel without fear of discrimination." The incident involving Isaiah Brooks raises serious concerns about Transglobal's ability to provide safe, dignified transport for all passengers. We require documented evidence of policy reform before we will reconsider our partnership. A board member, Elena Vasquez, spoke up for the first time. She was a corporate governance specialist, Hispanic, one of the few voices of diversity in TransGlobal's predominantly white leadership. "Have we reached out to Mr. Brooks Patterson?" Shook his head. His attorney sent a letter at 2 a.m. Brooks is filing suit against the airline, against Diane Fletcher personally, and against the Port Authority. But the letter specifies that he's not asking for monetary damages. He's demanding operational changes, complete overhaul of passenger treatment protocols, independent oversight board, public accountability measures, full audit of discrimination complaints from the past 5 years. That's actually reasonable. Elena's voice carried a note of surprise. It's a checklist for comprehensive reform. The general counsel agreed, which means he's not just angry. He's strategic. He knows exactly what he wants. And there's one more thing. The CFO's voice dropped. Brooks's company, Apex Quantum Systems, submitted a bid yesterday afternoon to purchase TransGlobal's entire fleet and route structure in the event of bankruptcy. The bid was substantial. $18.7 billion. The room erupted. What? He's trying to buy us. Is that even legal? Patterson held up a hand for silence. He's not trying to destroy us. The realization was dawning. He's trying to own us. He wants to rebuild us his way. Elena Vasquez leaned forward. Then we have two choices. We can fight him, protect our pride, and probably lose everything in the process. Or we can negotiate, accept his demands, implement his reforms, and maybe salvage something. If we negotiate, we're admitting fault. Another board member argued. We are at fault. Elena's voice was sharp. We had a senior flight attendant with 2 prior write-ups for discriminatory practices still working first class. We had protocols that allowed a passenger to be forcibly removed based on nothing but a crew member's gut feeling. We failed. The video evidence is undeniable. 50 million people have watched it by now. We can deny responsibility, or we can take ownership and change. Patterson looked around the room at his board members. Some looked angry. Some looked resigned. All looked exhausted. What happened to Fletcher? He asked. Terminated at 11 p.m. last night. The general counsel's voice was flat. For cause, which means no severance. She's also been named personally in Brooks's lawsuit. The junior flight attendant, Sophia Ramos. She gave a statement to the FBI at midnight. Full cooperation. Her testimony corroborates the videos. She admitted that Fletcher instructed her to watch Brooks before any incident occurred suggesting premeditation. The general counsel paused. She was fired 2 weeks ago for an unrelated violation, but it's pretty clear TransGlobal was retaliating for her testimony. Get her back. Patterson's voice was immediate. Rehire her with back pay and a public apology. We need people who tell the truth, not people who stay silent. The CFO pulled up another screen. Social media sentiment analysis shows we're at negative 92%. That's worse than United during the overbooking scandal. We're a national pariah. Patterson stood up and walked back to the window. $52 billion. Gone. The work of 40 years building an airline from a regional carrier to a global powerhouse. All of it evaporating because one person made one bad decision and everyone else let it happen. Draft a statement. He turned to face the board. Full accountability. We failed Mr. Brooks. We failed our passengers. We're implementing immediate reforms. Independent oversight board. Bias training that actually works, not checkbox compliance. Zero tolerance for discrimination. Complete transparency on complaint resolution. He paused. And reach out to Brooks's attorney. Tell them we want to negotiate. We'll implement his demands. All of them. Because the alternative is bankruptcy. And if we go bankrupt, he'll buy us anyway and implement them himself. At least this way we maintain some control. The general counsel nodded and started typing. Patterson looked at the stock ticker one more time. $51 per share. $52 billion lost. All because Diane Fletcher had looked at Isaiah Brooks and decided in 3 seconds that he didn't belong. The most expensive 3 seconds in aviation history. Diane Fletcher's apartment in Brooklyn had become a prison. She'd woken up at 6 a.m. to find her phone exploding with notifications. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Emails flooding in faster than she could delete them. Facebook messages demanding she be fired, arrested, sued into oblivion. Her Facebook account was the first to go. She tried to log in planning to delete it, but the platform had already suspended her account for violating community standards. The hate messages had triggered automatic moderation. Her Instagram was next. Deactivated within an hour. Not by her choice, but by the platform's response to mass reporting. LinkedIn lasted until 9 a.m. when her profile was suddenly marked unavailable. Recruiters and former colleagues had left dozens of messages before it disappeared. Diane, what were you thinking? Do not list me as a reference. I can't believe you did this. She sat on her couch still in pajamas and turned on the TV. Her face was on every channel. Not just her name, her face. Screenshots from her Facebook profile before it was deleted. Photos from her Instagram. A corporate headshot from TransGlobal's website. CNN was playing a segment with a legal analyst, Diane Fletcher, the flight attendant at the center of this controversy, had been written up twice previously for discriminatory seating practices. Which raises the question, why was she still working first class after multiple complaints MSNBC had dug up her training records? A legal expert was explaining she'd been through sensitivity training 3 times. 3 times, and she passed all the tests. Which suggests either the training was ineffective, or Fletcher was deliberately ignoring it. Neither option looks good for TransGlobal. Her sister called at 10:30. Diane Mom's nursing home called. They're getting phone calls. People threatening to protest. You need to do something. I don't know what to do. Diane's voice sounded strange to her own ears. Hollow. Defeated. You need a lawyer. You need a PR person. You need help. Diane had already talked to a lawyer. At 7 a.m., still half asleep, she'd called her union representative who'd connected her with TransGlobal's legal counsel. The conversation had been brief and devastating. Ms. Fletcher, the airline terminated you last night for cause, which means you're not entitled to legal representation from us. Your union can provide counsel, but I should inform you that you've been named personally in a civil suit filed by Isaiah Brooks. The charges include assault, false imprisonment, and civil rights violations. You'll need your own attorney. She'd hung up and called the union lawyer who'd been marginally more helpful but no more optimistic. Diane. I'll be honest with you. There are 11 videos, federal judge testimony, military officer corroboration. The evidence is overwhelming. We can fight the termination for due process reasons, but the civil suit? You're going to lose. The question is how much it will cost you. How much everything. Your savings. Your retirement. Your apartment if it comes to that. Isaiah Brooks has an unlimited legal budget and the moral high ground. We can negotiate a settlement, but it won't be cheap. Now, sitting alone in her apartment at noon watching CNN dissect her entire career, Diane tried to understand where it had gone wrong. She'd been maintaining standards. She'd been doing her job. She'd been protecting the integrity of first class from people who didn't belong there. Hadn't she? The man on TV, Isaiah Brooks, though she'd never asked his name, had never cared to know it didn't look threatening in the footage. Looked tired, quiet, composed. But he'd been wearing a hoodie, jeans, worn sneakers. He'd looked wrong. Except he hadn't been wrong. He'd been a CEO, a defense contractor, someone managing military operations across continents, and she'd treated him like a criminal. The realization was like falling through ice, cold and shocking and impossible to stop. She'd been wrong. Catastrophically, career-endingly, life-destroyingly wrong. And the worst part? The absolutely worst part was that even now, even after everything, some part of her mind was still whispering, but he looked so out of place. That voice was the problem. That voice was bias. That voice was everything the sensitivity trainers had tried to warn her about. and she'd ignored them because she'd been so certain that 26 years of experience had taught her to recognize who belonged and who didn't. Experience had taught her nothing except how to dress up prejudice as professionalism. Diane's phone rang again. Unknown number. She didn't answer. It went to voicemail. She listened. Ms. Fletcher. This is Sarah Kim from the New York Times. I'm writing a story about the incident, and I'd like to get your perspective. Please call me back at... Delete. Another call. Another voicemail. Diane Fletcher. You racist piece of... Delete. Another. I hope you lose everything. Delete. She turned off her phone, sat in silence, and understood that her life as she'd known it was over. 26 years of service erased in one night. Her reputation destroyed. Her finances about to be devastated by legal fees and settlements. All because she'd looked at a man and decided in 3 seconds that he didn't belong. The most expensive judgment call of her life. Richard Pemberton's hotel room in London had become a different kind of prison. He'd landed at Heathrow 6 hours after Isaiah had been removed from the flight. The cabin had been tense, silent. No one spoke. Everyone was on their phones watching the videos, reading the coverage, tweeting their own accounts of what they'd witnessed. Richard had spent the flight pretending to work, but really just staring at his laptop screen, not seeing anything. When he landed, he turned on his phone and watched his life implode. Text from his boss at Medifarm International, "Call me. Immediately." Text from his wife, Lisa. The kids saw it online. Emma is asking questions I don't know how to answer. Text from his college roommate, Dude. What the hell? He opened Twitter first. Mistake. His name was trending. Hashtag Richard Pemberton with 89,000 tweets. His face captured from the videos was everywhere. Screenshots showing him in seat 5B complaining about his screen while Isaiah was being dragged past him in the aisle. The comments were brutal. This entitled prick started it all over a flickering screen. Richard Pemberton complained that his TV wasn't perfect and a man got arrested. White privilege in action. Imagine being so fragile that you need another human being dragged off a plane because your seat isn't perfect. Richard Pemberton of Medifarm International. Your comfort is not more important than someone else's dignity. That last one had been retweeted 43,000 times. He called his boss. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. Richard, do you understand what you've done? I didn't drag anyone off, I just complained about my screen. You started a chain of events that ended with our third largest client canceling their contract. Transglobal Airlines represented $4.2 million annually for this company. They're gone. And you know why. Because our VP of regional sales was the entitled brat who caused an international incident over a TV screen. That's not fair. Fair. You want to talk about fair. You demanded a man give up his seat because you were inconvenienced. You threatened to call corporate. You started this, and now you're the face of everything wrong with corporate entitlement culture. I didn't mean... You're fired. Effective immediately. Don't bother cleaning out your office. We'll ship your belongings. And Richard. Don't list me as a reference. The line went dead. Richard sat on the hotel bed, phone in hand, processing what had just happened. Fired. Just like that. 15 years with Medifarm. Gone. He opened LinkedIn. 47 new connection requests. He felt a brief flicker of hope. Maybe industry contacts wanting to offer support? He opened them. Every single one was a message from recruiters or HR professionals. Mr. Pemberton, we've flagged your profile. You will not be considered for any positions at our firm. Just wanted to let you know that your application has been permanently rejected based on your behavior. We do not hire people who think their minor inconvenience is more important than human dignity. His professional network was imploding. His LinkedIn profile, which he'd carefully cultivated for 15 years, was now radioactive. His phone rang. Lisa. The school called. No preamble. Emma came home crying today. Her classmates found the video. They're calling you Richard the racist. She's 8 years old, Richard. 8. And her classmates are asking if her daddy really got a man arrested. I didn't get him arrested. Yes, you did. You demanded they move him. You threatened to call corporate. You started the whole thing because your TV screen was flickering. And when they dragged him past your seat, you know what you did. You smirked. It's on video, Richard. You smirked like you'd won something. Richard closed his eyes. He'd watched the video. She was right. In the moment when security dragged Isaiah past seat 5B, Richard's face showed this tiny, satisfied expression. This little smirk that meant good. He's gone. My problem is solved. He'd been so focused on his own convenience that he'd never once considered the human cost. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Richard's voice was quiet. That's the problem. Lisa's voice broke. You never think about how far anything goes. You just think about what you want right now. I'm taking the kids to my mother's for a while. Don't call. Don't come by. Just figure out who you want to be. Because this person, the person in that video, I don't recognize him. And I don't want my children growing up thinking that's acceptable. She hung up. Richard sat alone in his London hotel room and Googled his own name. 200,000 results, all posted in the last 18 hours. His Wikipedia page had already been updated. Richard Pemberton, born 1976, is an American businessman who became known in 2024 for his role in the Transglobal Airlines discrimination incident. There were memes, so many memes. His face photoshopped onto historical villains. Richard Pemberton demands your seat on a Montgomery bus. Richard Pemberton complains about the accommodations on the Titanic. Let them eat cake with his face replacing Marie Antoinette. He felt sick. His phone dinged. Email from an unknown sender. Legal notice from Apex Quantum Systems. He'd been named in the civil suit. All because a TV screen flickered. And he'd decided his comfort mattered more than someone else's dignity. The Port Authority administrative hearing took place 3 weeks after the incident in a sterile conference room that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and bad decisions. Derek Mason sat on one side of a long table flanked by his union representative and an attorney the union had provided. On the other side sat the Port Authority administrator, the head of internal affairs, the chief of security, and a stenographer recording every word. The wall screen showed 11 videos synchronized, all playing the same incident from different angles. Derek had watched them so many times over the past 3 weeks that he could recite every word, every movement, every damning second. But watching them again in this official setting with his career on the line was different. Worse. Because now he could see what everyone else saw. Not a difficult passenger being lawfully removed, but a man being assaulted for having the audacity to refuse an unreasonable demand. The administrator, a white woman in her 50s named Patricia Harrison, had the tired expression of someone who'd seen too many of these hearings. She clicked a button, pausing the video at the moment Derek's hand landed on Isaiah's shoulder. Officer Mason. Her voice was professionally neutral. This is the video from passenger Carlos Rivera, seat 3C. At timestamp 6:44:17, you make physical contact with Mr. Brooks. He then says, She turned up the volume. Isaiah's voice clear and measured. Officer, I'm asking you one last time. Please remove your hand. She paused it again. You respond by tightening your grip. Why? Derek shifted in his seat. He was being non-compliant. Non-compliant with what specifically crew instructions to vacate his seat, which we've established was not a lawful crew instruction, as Mr. Brooks had done nothing to warrant removal. The administrator clicked to another video angle. But let's continue. At what point in this interaction does Mr. Brooks become physically aggressive or threatening? Derek watched himself grab Isaiah's other shoulder, watched Isaiah's body go limp. Watched himself shout, "Stop resisting," even though the video clearly showed Isaiah wasn't resisting at all. He was tensing up. Derek's voice lacked conviction, bracing for confrontation. The administrator played it in slow motion. I see him relaxing his muscles, making his body dead weight. That's not resistance. That's passive non-compliance, which is a protected form of civil disobedience. You had no legal authority to use force. Derek's union rep leaned forward. My client was responding to a crew member's assessment of a security threat. There was no security threat. Internal Affairs interrupted, pulling up another document. We've reviewed the flight attendant's statement. Diane Fletcher's only justification for asking Mr. Brooks to move was that she needed a seat for another passenger. There was no safety concern, no policy violation, no reasonable basis for removal. The administrator clicked to the audio file from Judith Brennan's recording. Luis Garcia's voice came through clear and damning. He's not worth the paperwork, Derek. Let's just get him on the jet bridge. Derek's voice. He resisted. He gets the cuffs. The zip tie sound. P. Your partner. The administrator's voice was colder now. A 22-year veteran with an exemplary record gave you a clear opportunity to de-escalate. He suggested you step back, call a supervisor, handle this properly. You ignored him. Why? Because I was pissed. Because a civilian had talked back to me. Because I couldn't let him win. Derek didn't voice any of that, just sat in silence. Officer Mason, this board's finding is unanimous. You violated 7 separate codes of conduct: excessive use of force, failure to de-escalate false arrest, unlawful restraint, conduct unbecoming civil rights violations, and bringing disrepute to the Port Authority. Derek's world narrowed. This was it. The end. Your employment with the Port Authority is terminated effective immediately. We are revoking your law enforcement certification permanently, and we are recommending to the District Attorney's Office that you be charged with misdemeanor assault and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The union rep started to object, but the administrator held up a hand. Officer Mason, you had every opportunity to handle this correctly. Your partner tried to stop you. A federal judge warned you. Multiple witnesses documented your actions, and you chose repeatedly to escalate. You didn't make a split-second decision in the heat of the moment. You made a series of choices over several minutes, all of which prioritized your ego over your duty. She closed the file folder in front of her with a sharp snap. You're done. This hearing is adjourned. 3 weeks after the incident, Isaiah Brooks sat in a comfortable chair in a tastefully appointed office in downtown Austin, Texas. The office belonged to Dr. Sarah Webb, a black woman in her 60s with kind eyes and 30 years of experience treating trauma related to racial discrimination. Isaiah had resisted therapy for years. He was the founder of a multi-billion-dollar company. He ran systems that protected nations. He employed 15,000 people. He didn't need to talk about his feelings. But his chief of staff, Ana Reyes, had sat him down 2 days after he returned from London and delivered an ultimatum. You're not sleeping. You're not eating. You're spending 16 hours a day working on the lawsuit instead of running the company. You're running on rage and exhaustion. So you can either talk to a therapist or I'm calling your father and telling him you need an intervention. The threat of his father's intervention was enough. Isaiah made the appointment. Now sitting across from Dr. Webb, he tried to explain what he was feeling and couldn't quite put into words. How are you sleeping? Dr. Webb asked. I'm not. Isaiah's voice was flat. 2, maybe 3 hours a night. Then I wake up and I can feel Derek's hand on my shoulder. The pressure, the grip. And I'm back there, on the plane, being dragged. Flashbacks every night. Sometimes during the day, too. Random moments. I'll be in a meeting and someone will touch my shoulder to get my attention and I'm back in that cabin zip-tied helpless. You said helpless. Dr. Webb made a note. But you weren't helpless. You made deliberate choices about how to respond. Isaiah shook his head. I didn't fight back. I should have. I could have, but I didn't. Because you knew fighting back would give them the excuse they were looking for. Yes. But knowing that doesn't change how it felt. Doesn't change the fact that I had to let them do it. Let them grab me, drag me, zip-tie me, just let it happen. That wasn't helplessness. Dr. Webb's voice was gentle. That was strategy. That was you maintaining control by choosing your response. It didn't feel like control. I know. Dr. Webb leaned forward slightly. Isaiah, what you experienced was assault. The fact that you weren't seriously injured doesn't make it less real. The fact that you chose not to fight back doesn't make it less traumatic. You were violated. Your dignity was stripped away in front of 50 people. And no amount of logic or strategy changes how that feels in your body. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. I keep thinking about all the people this has happened to who didn't have my resources, who didn't have a $48 billion contract to leverage, who didn't have lawyers and media attention and Pentagon connections. What happened to them? That Dr. Webb's voice was firm is exactly the right question. But it's also a deflection. We're not talking about them right now. We're talking about you, about what happened to you, about how you're processing it. I don't know how to process it, Isaiah admitted. I'm angry, but I'm also exhausted. And I'm tired of having to be twice as good to be treated half as well. I'm tired of having to prove I belong everywhere I go. I'm just tired. Dr. Webb nodded. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to be angry. Those are appropriate responses to what you experienced, but I can't afford to stay tired or angry. Isaiah's voice carried an edge now. I have a company to run. I have a lawsuit to prosecute. I have changes to implement. I don't have time to fall apart. You're not falling apart. You're processing trauma. There's a difference. Isaiah looked out the window at the Austin skyline. When I was 8 years old, my father took me to a bank to open a savings account. We were followed by security the entire time. The manager questioned whether we had enough money to open an account. My dad stayed composed the whole time, completed the transaction, and left with dignity. He paused, remembering. Outside, I asked him why they treated us like that. He knelt down, looked me in the eye, and told me, in this world, some people see your skin before they see your character. Your job isn't to change their eyes. It's to build something they can't ignore. So you built Apex Quantum. Dr. Webb's voice was understanding. So I built something they couldn't ignore. Got contracts with the Pentagon. Became indispensable. Thought that if I was important enough, valuable enough, successful enough, people would see me. But they didn't. No. They saw a black man in a hoodie who didn't belong. $48 billion worth of contracts, and Diane Fletcher took one look at me and decided I was a problem. That must hurt. Isaiah felt something crack in his chest. It does. It hurts that I did everything right, and it still wasn't enough. It hurts that my father's advice, build something they can't ignore, only matters if they bother to look. And it hurts that this happens every day to people who don't have the power to fight back. So what are you going to do about it? Dr. Webb asked. Isaiah looked at her. Build something better. Better than what? Better than a world where people like Diane Fletcher can make judgments based on clothes. Better than a structure that lets discrimination hide behind policy. Better than an industry that trains people to see passengers as problems instead of humans. Dr. Webb smiled. That sounds like a worthy goal. But Isaiah, you can't build something better if you don't take care of yourself first. Rage is a powerful motivator, but it burns out fast. You need to process what happened, not just weaponize it. How do I process it? By acknowledging that what happened to you was traumatic. By giving yourself permission to feel the anger, the violation, the hurt. By understanding that you can be both powerful and wounded, both successful and traumatized, both strategic and hurting. Isaiah sat with that for a moment. I don't know how to be wounded. I've spent my entire life proving I'm strong. Strength isn't the opposite of pain. Dr. Webb's voice was soft. Strength is knowing you're in pain and choosing to keep moving anyway. You've already done that. Now you just need to acknowledge the pain instead of pretending it doesn't exist. For the first time in 3 weeks, Isaiah felt something shift inside him. Not healing, that would take longer, but recognition. Permission to feel what he'd been suppressing. Okay. His voice was quiet. Let's start there. 6 months after the incident, Isaiah Brooks stood in front of 15,000 Apex Quantum employees via company-wide live stream. The Austin headquarters auditorium was packed with additional staff joining from offices in Seattle, Boston, London, Singapore, and 14 other cities around the world. Behind him, a single slide displayed on the massive screen. No corporate jargon, no buzzwords, just 6 words in simple text. The Human Element Initiative. 6 months ago, Isaiah's voice was measured but resonant. Something happened to me that's happened to millions of people. I was judged not by my character or my credentials, but by my appearance. And that judgment led to me being assaulted, zip-tied, and dragged off an airplane while 50 people watched. He clicked to the next slide. It was a still image from one of the videos. Isaiah being dragged down the aisle, his face against the carpet. The audience shifted uncomfortably. I could show you the other 10 videos. I could show you every angle, every perspective, every second of what happened. But you've all seen them. The world has seen them. 50 million views and counting. Another slide. Statistics on racial profiling in airlines, in retail banking, in healthcare, in housing, in employment. We've spent 20 years building artificial intelligence to solve logical problems, to predict weather patterns, to optimize supply chains, to coordinate military operations. And we've gotten very good at it. He paused, letting the silence settle. But we haven't built programs to predict when a Diane Fletcher is about to profile someone, when a Richard Pemberton is about to prioritize his comfort over someone else's dignity, when a Derek Mason is about to choose ego over duty, when a structure fails not because of bad code but because of bad culture. The final slide appeared. The Human Element Initiative. $500 million commitment. Today, Apex Quantum is announcing a 5-year, $500 million commitment to building technology that addresses the human problems technology can't usually solve. We're creating AI programs that can detect bias in real time, that can flag potentially discriminatory behavior before it escalates, that can train people not just on policy, but on recognizing their own assumptions. The names and faces of the leadership team appeared on screen. Leading this initiative will be Sophia Ramos, who was on Flight 447 and who chose truth over silence when it mattered most. Joining her will be Judith Brennan, retired federal judge, Carlos Rivera, who started recording when others stayed silent, Colonel James Bradford, who spoke up when it would have been easier to look away. Applause began to ripple through the auditorium. We're not building this to punish people. We're building it to prevent what happened to me from happening to anyone else. Because the real measure of technology isn't how fast it is or how efficient it is or how much profit it generates. It's whether it makes the world more fair. He paused one more time. And one more thing. Transglobal Airlines filed for bankruptcy last month. Yesterday, my bid to purchase their fleet routes and infrastructure was accepted. We're relaunching the airline under a new name, Sentinel Air, and it will be the first airline in history built from the ground up on principles of equity, transparency, and dignity. The applause was deafening now. I got dragged off one of their planes. Isaiah allowed himself a slight smile, but I'm going to make damn sure no one else ever does. JFK. Terminal 5, Gate 23. Exactly 1 year after the incident. Isaiah Brooks stood near the windows watching the first Sentinel Air flight prepare for departure. The aircraft gleamed in the afternoon sun, its livery redesigned with clean lines and the motto printed near the tail, "Dignity in every seat." The gate area looked similar to how it had a year ago. Same configuration. Same seats. Same boarding process beginning. But everything was different now. The gate agent, a young woman named Maria, who'd been hired through Sentinel's new equity-focused recruitment program, scanned boarding passes with genuine warmth. No assessments, no judgments, just professional service for every passenger. A teenager approached the gate. Marcus. 16 years old. Black, wearing a hoodie and carrying a backpack. He had his boarding pass ready, and Isaiah could see the slight tension in his shoulders. the unconscious bracing for the question that might come. "Are you sure this is your seat?" Maria scanned his pass and smiled. "Welcome aboard, Marcus. You're in 2A today, our best seat. Have a wonderful flight." Marcus's shoulders relaxed. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by a genuine smile. "Thank you." Isaiah watched him board, watched him walk down the jet bridge without fear, without having to prove he belonged. Just belonging. That's what justice looks like, Isaiah thought. Not revenge, not punishment. Just a world where a kid in a hoodie can board a plane without carrying the weight of other people's assumptions. Someone approached from behind. Mr. Brooks. Isaiah turned. The gate agent, Sarah, had stepped away from the counter. "I wanted to thank you. I was laid off when TransGlobal went under. Sentinel hired me back. And the training you implemented, the real training, not the checkbox kind. It actually helps. It teaches us to see people, not stereotypes. What happened to you was terrible. But what you built from it, that's hope." Isaiah smiled. A real smile. "Thank you, Sarah. That means everything." His phone buzzed. Ana Reyes. First flight departing on time. All safety checks green. Passenger satisfaction scores already higher than industry average. "You did it, Isaiah." He texted back. "We did it." That night, a video went viral. Marcus the teenager, posting from seat 2A, just flew Sentinel Air for the first time. "For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove I belonged. I just belonged." If you've ever been made to feel less than human for how you look, what you wear, for existing, this airline gets it. They really get it. The video got 22 million views in 24 hours, and Isaiah Brooks, watching it from his home office, felt something he hadn't felt since before the incident. Not anger, not exhaustion, not even satisfaction. Peace. The kind that comes from knowing you turned your worst moment into someone else's freedom. His phone buzzed one more time. A number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Mr. Brooks." A young voice, nervous. "My name is Marcus. I'm the kid from the video, the one in seat 2A. I wanted to say thank you for what you built, for making it so I could fly without being scared." Isaiah closed his eyes. 22 million views, $52 billion lost, 11 videos, 1 year of fighting, all of it worth it for this one call. "You don't have to thank me, Marcus." Isaiah's voice was warm. "You just have to keep flying, keep taking up space, keep belonging. I will." Marcus's promise carried weight. They hung up. Isaiah looked out his office window at the Austin skyline. Somewhere out there, planes were taking off. Kids in hoodies boarding without fear. Gate agents trained to see people, not stereotypes. The world was still broken in 1,000 ways. But in this one small corner, in this one industry, it was a little more fair. That wasn't everything. But it was something. And sometimes something is enough. Diane Fletcher never worked in aviation again. She took a job at a call center in Pennsylvania, filed for bankruptcy to settle the civil judgment against her, and quietly moved to a town where no one recognized her face from the videos. Her settlement paid Isaiah's legal fees but awarded him no monetary damages, exactly as he'd requested. He'd wanted acknowledgement of wrongdoing, not wealth. He got both. She lost everything else. Richard Pemberton lost his pharmaceutical career and now works in his brother-in-law's insurance office in suburban New Jersey for a quarter of his former salary. His daughter Emma changed schools twice to escape the bullying that followed her after the videos went viral. His wife Lisa filed for divorce 8 months after the incident. Richard speaks at occasional corporate ethics seminars about entitlement and consequences, a penance he imposed on himself. He still can't watch the videos without feeling sick. Officer Derek Mason served 90 days in county jail for misdemeanor assault and lost his law enforcement certification permanently. He works mall security. Now the irony is lost on no one, and lives with the knowledge that 8 seconds of bad judgment destroyed a career he'd spent 3 years building. His partner, Luis Garcia, stayed with Port Authority, was promoted to senior officer, and now teaches de-escalation training nationwide, using that day as a case study in what happens when ego overrides duty. Sofia Ramos became the youngest director of a major corporate ethics division at 25. She speaks at conferences about the cost of silence and the courage required to tell truth to power. Carlos Rivera left his marketing job to run a non-profit teaching bystander intervention funded partially by Isaiah's foundation. The non-profit has trained 43,000 people so far. Judith Brennan came out of retirement to chair Sentinel Air's Passenger Rights Board, ensuring every complaint is heard and investigated without bias or bureaucracy. Colonel Bradford worked with the Pentagon to implement bias detection protocols across all military contractor interactions, making Project Sentinel about more than just logistics. Within 2 years, 7 major airlines adopted Sentinel's human element protocols. Within 5 years, it became industry standard. Complaints of racial profiling in air travel dropped 73% nationwide. But the real measure of success came in thousands of messages Isaiah received from passengers who flew without fear. For the first time, people who looked at a first-class seat and felt they belonged, not because they had to prove anything, but because the structure finally saw them as human. That's not revenge. That's revolution. And it started with one man who refused to move from seat 2A. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that one person's courage can change an entire industry, then please do 3 things for me. First, hit that like button. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We share stories like this every week, stories about ordinary people who stood up for what's right when it would have been easier to stay silent. Stories that prove justice isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation. And third, the most important one, share this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their dignity matters. Share it with someone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. Share it with someone who has the power to make change but hasn't found the courage yet. Because Isaiah's story isn't just about him. It's about every person who's been judged by their appearance instead of their character. It's about every Sofia who stayed silent and regretted it. It's about every Carlos who found the courage to speak up. And it's about every Marcus who just wants to fly without fear. The comments section is open. Tell me your story. Have you ever witnessed discrimination? Have you spoken up? Have you stayed silent and wished you hadn't? Let's talk about it, because change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we share our truths, when we hold each other accountable, and when we refuse to accept that this is just the way things are. Remember Isaiah's words. I don't need my title to deserve basic human dignity. No one does. That's not just a line from a story. That's a principle worth fighting for. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being the kind of person who believes the world can be better. See you in the next story.